Our story begins in 1962 in the Bohemian art galleries and underground music clubs of Paris, where two of the most beautiful and dangerous people in Europe were about to create a scandal that would last for over 6 decades. Alain Delon was already becoming France's most famous movie star, with his striking blue eyes and magnetic screen presence making him the heartthrob of millions of women around the world. But despite his growing fame, Alain was drawn to the underground art scene, where creativity and rebellion mattered more than commercial success. It was in this world that he met Christa Päffgen, a German-born model and singer who performed under the stage name Nico. Tall, blonde, and ethereally beautiful, Nico possessed an otherworldly presence that made everyone around her feel like they were in the company of some exotic creature from another planet. Their relationship was intense, passionate, and completely unsuitable for either of their careers. Alain was being positioned as the wholesome leading man of French cinema, while Nico was becoming the muse of avant-garde artists and musicians who saw conventional morality as the enemy of true artistic expression. For 6 months in 1962, they lived together in Alain's Paris apartment, creating a private world that existed completely separate from their public personas. Friends who visited them during this period described a couple so absorbed in each other that they seemed to communicate without words. But their relationship was also destructive. Both Alain and Nico were strong-willed, complicated people who brought out each other's most intense emotions. Their fights were legendary, their reconciliations were passionate, and their mutual obsession was both beautiful and frightening to witness. In August 1962, everything changed. Nico discovered she was pregnant. The news should have been a moment of joy, but instead it became the beginning of a nightmare that would consume 3 lives for the next 60 years. Alain's reaction to the pregnancy was immediate and devastating. He accused Nico of trying to trap him, suggested that the baby might not be his, and demanded that she get an abortion. When she refused, he told her that if she went through with the pregnancy, she would be doing it alone. Nico, who had been hoping that the pregnancy would bring them closer together, was crushed by Alain's rejection, but she was also determined to have the child, with or without his support. On August 11, 1962, Henri Päffgen was born in Paris. He was a beautiful baby with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold an unusual intelligence. Nico looked at her son and saw the love of her life reflected in his features. But when she tried to contact Alain to tell him about the birth, he refused to take her calls. What happened next established a pattern that would define the next 4 decades. Nico would repeatedly try to get Alain to acknowledge his son, and Alain would repeatedly deny any connection to the child. In 1963, Nico publicly named Alain as the father of her son, giving interviews to French magazines in which she pleaded with him to take responsibility for Henri. Alain's response was swift and brutal. Through his lawyers, he issued a statement denying paternity and threatening legal action against anyone who repeated Nico's claims. The scandal dominated French entertainment media for months, with photographers following both Nico and Alain, trying to capture images that would somehow prove or disprove the connection between them. But Alain had the resources to control his public image, while Nico was increasingly seen as an unstable artist who was trying to use a fake paternity claim to revive her flagging career. As the years passed, the story became one of the most persistent rumors in European entertainment circles. Nico would bring Henri to film festivals and premieres where Alain was appearing, hoping for some acknowledgement or sign of recognition, but Alain would look right through them, as if they were strangers. The effect on Henri was devastating. He grew up knowing that somewhere in the world was a man who might be his father, but who refused to admit it. He watched Alain's movies obsessively, studying his face for resemblances, analyzing his mannerisms for inherited traits, and dreaming of a day when they might have a relationship. Nico, meanwhile, spiraled into drug addiction and depression. The constant rejection and public humiliation had broken something fundamental in her spirit. She began using heroin regularly, and her career suffered as she became increasingly unreliable and difficult to work with. By the 1970s, Nico was performing in small clubs and underground venues, often bringing Ari with her because she had no one else to watch him. The boy would sit in the back of smoke-filled rooms, watching his mother sing haunting songs about love and loss, while surrounded by addicts and artists who treated him with a mixture of sympathy and curiosity. Everyone knew who his father was supposed to be, recalled one of Nico's friends from this period. But nobody talked about it around Ari. It was like this terrible secret that everyone carried but nobody would acknowledge. As Ari grew older, he began his own campaign to gain recognition from Alain. He wrote letters that were never answered, sent photographs that were never acknowledged, and gave interviews to magazines in which he talked about his desire to meet his father. In 1988, when Nico died of a brain hemorrhage at the age of 49, Ari hoped that her death might somehow create an opportunity for reconciliation with Alain. He attended her funeral, knowing that Alain had been informed of the service, hoping that grief might bring them together. Alain didn't come. The rejection at his mother's funeral marked a turning point for Ari. Instead of giving up his quest for acknowledgement, he became more determined than ever to prove his connection to the man he believed was his father. Throughout the 1990s and 2000s, Ari pursued every legal avenue available to him. He filed paternity suits, demanded DNA tests, and enlisted lawyers who specialized in celebrity inheritance cases. But Alain had resources and legal representation that far exceeded anything Ari could afford, and every legal challenge was successfully blocked. The public nature of the dispute began to take its toll on both men. Alain found himself constantly asked about Ari in interviews, and his denials became increasingly angry and defensive. Ari, meanwhile, became known primarily as the man who claims to be Alain Delon's son, rather than for any achievements of his own. It consumed his entire life, said one of Ari's friends. Every decision he made, every relationship he formed, every career move he considered was influenced by this obsession with proving his connection to Alain Delon. The case took on additional urgency as Alain aged. Ari knew that if his father died without acknowledging him, he would lose not just the possibility of a relationship, but also any claim to inheritance rights that might legally belong to him. In 2019, when Alain suffered a stroke, Ari saw what might be his final opportunity. He launched a highly publicized campaign to force a DNA test, arguing that Alain's declining health made it essential to resolve the paternity question before it was too late. The campaign attracted international attention, with media outlets around the world covering the story of the aging movie star and the son he had allegedly abandoned. Public opinion began to shift in Ari's favor, with many people questioning why Alain would continue to refuse a simple DNA test if he had nothing to hide. The pressure became enormous. Celebrity advocates for children's rights began supporting Ari's cause. Legal experts argued that he had a fundamental right to know his biological heritage. Medical professionals pointed out that genetic information could be crucial for Ari's health and the health of his own children. Finally, in late 2023, something unexpected happened. Alain's lawyers contacted Ari's legal team with an offer. Alain would submit to a DNA test, but only under specific conditions. The results would remain private, shared only with immediate family members. There would be no public announcement of the findings, regardless of what they showed. Ari agreed immediately. After 61 years of uncertainty, he was finally going to get definitive answers about his biological heritage. The DNA samples were collected in December of 2023, with representatives from both legal teams present to ensure the chain of custody was properly maintained. The samples were sent to one of Europe's most prestigious genetic laboratories, where they underwent the most comprehensive paternity analysis available. 2 weeks later, the results came back. But what the DNA test revealed was not what anyone expected. According to the genetic analysis, Alain Delon was not Ari's biological father. The test results showed no genetic relationship between the two men whatsoever. The news should have ended the controversy once and for all. Ari should have been devastated, Alain should have been vindicated, and the 60-year mystery should have been solved. Instead, the DNA results created an entirely new mystery that was even more shocking than the original paternity question. Because if Alain Delon was not Ari's father, then why had he spent 60 years acting like a man with something to hide?
The answer came from an unexpected source: Alain's own confession, delivered privately to his family just weeks before his death in 2024. According to family members who were present for this conversation, Alain revealed that he had always known he was not Ari's biological father. The DNA test had confirmed what he had suspected from the beginning of his relationship with Nico. But there was more to the story than simple biology. Alain revealed that in 1962, Nico had confided in him about the real identity of Ari's father. The actual father was a married man, a prominent figure in European politics, whose career would have been destroyed if his affair with Nico became public knowledge. Nico had begged Alain to claim paternity for the child, not because it was true, but because it would protect the real father's reputation and political future. In return, the politician had agreed to provide financial support for Ari's upbringing, channeled through secret accounts that could never be traced back to him. Alain had initially agreed to this arrangement, seeing it as a way to help Nico while also protecting a family friend. But as the years passed and the media attention intensified, he had begun to regret his decision. The constant questions and accusations had made him defensive and angry, leading him to deny paternity more and more vehemently. The tragic irony was that Alain's increasingly hostile denials had convinced everyone, including Ari himself, that he must be the real father, trying to avoid responsibility. His efforts to protect another man's secret had made him appear guilty of abandoning his own child. For 60 years, Alain had carried the burden of being seen as a deadbeat father when he was actually protecting the reputation of the real father, who had continued to provide financial support for Ari throughout his life, without him ever knowing the source of that support. When Alain finally agreed to the DNA test in 2023, it was not because he had something to hide, but because he was tired of carrying someone else's secret. At 88 years old, facing his own mortality, he had decided that the truth was more important than protecting a decades-old political scandal. The revelation devastated everyone involved. Ari learned that he had spent his entire life pursuing a relationship with a man who was not his father, while the man who had actually been supporting him financially remained anonymous. Alain's family discovered that their father had sacrificed his own reputation to protect someone who had never publicly acknowledged his sacrifice.
Most tragically, Nico had died in 1988 without ever revealing the truth to her son, leaving him to pursue a hopeless quest that she could have ended with a single conversation. The identity of Ari's real father remains a closely guarded family secret. Some reports suggest that he was a high-ranking government official who served in multiple European administrations throughout the 1960s and 1970s. Others claim that he was a business leader whose companies had extensive government contracts that could have been jeopardized by scandal. What is known is that the real father has continued to provide financial support for Ari even after Alain's death, suggesting that he is still alive and still committed to maintaining his anonymity. For Ari, now in his 60s, the DNA results brought both relief and profound sadness. Relief that he finally knew the truth, but sadness that he had wasted so much of his life pursuing a connection that could never exist. "I spent 60 years hating a man for abandoning me," Ari said in a rare interview after Alain's death. "Now I learned that he was actually protecting me, and that my real father has been watching over me all along. I don't know how to process that." The story of Alain Delon and Ari Boulogne serves as a reminder that sometimes the truth is more complicated than it appears, and that people's motivations for their actions may be completely different from what we assume. The emotional aftermath of the DNA revelation continued to reverberate through both families long after the initial shock had subsided. For Alain's legitimate children, Anthony, Anushka, and Elaine Fabienne, learning about their father's deception created a complex mix of pride and confusion. They were proud their father had protected someone's secret at personal cost, but confused why he never shared this burden. Anushka Delon later revealed in interviews that the family had always known something was different about the Ari situation. Father would become visibly upset whenever Ari's name was mentioned, but not in the way you'd expect from someone trying to avoid responsibility. It was more like he was carrying a weight that he couldn't put down. The revelation also shed new light on several of Alain's past actions that seemed cruel at the time. His refusal to attend Nico's funeral was not callousness, but an attempt to avoid creating a public spectacle. His increasingly hostile denials were not the reactions of a guilty man, but the desperate attempts of someone trapped in a lie that had grown too big to escape. For Ari, the truth brought relief mixed with grief. Relief from understanding his pursuit wasn't delusional, and grief from realizing he had spent his life angry at a man who was actually protecting him. Many financial breaks that had come his way over the years had likely been arranged by his real father through intermediaries.
Alain spent the last 60 years of his life being seen as a man who abandoned his child, when he was actually a man who sacrificed his own reputation to protect a friend and support a child who wasn't even his own. The politicians and public figures who had criticized Alain over the years for his apparent heartlessness were forced to reassess their judgments. Media outlets began running retractions, and entertainment historians started revising their assessments of Alain's character. It's a story about the price of loyalty, the burden of secrets, and the tragic consequences that can result when good intentions collide with public misunderstanding. If this incredible story of hidden truth and lifelong sacrifice moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Share this video with someone who might be quick to judge others without knowing the full story. And tell us in the comments, have you ever discovered that a situation was completely different from what you originally believed? Because sometimes the people we think are villains are actually heroes carrying burdens we can't even imagine.